Okay, so this is the official welcome to Sally Mann, good friend and leader of a church in her community that's, you know, are you the fifth generation of your family to be in the fourth of 5 generations of your family to be in the same community? So huge welcome to you, Sally, and maybe you can just start us off by sharing a little bit about the book, why you wrote it, what it's about. Some of us will have read it, not everybody will have, and if you're like me, I read it about 2 years ago, so I could use a refresher.
Well, thanks, Danielle. I mean, it's lovely to be here, and I'm hoping this will be interactive and that you'll share your stories as much as we share ours. And Dave's here as well. He's just at the other side of the room, but we can ask him questions because it is genuinely our story, and probably the majority of it, although it starts off in my family, is Dave's story. Certainly all the pirating that went on and the law breaking was probably down to Dave rather than me. I just want that disclaimer out there. So how long did the book take to write is something I'm asked, and the answer is 25 years plus 3 days in a caravan. So we weren't going to write a book. We're not very reflexive people. We're activists, and not very good at just taking stock of things, really. But a number of things happened. One of which is that we met Ash and Ange Barker, and Ash found out that I'm the 4th generation of my family to live in the same 4 streets in East Ham in East London. And obviously, because he's Australian, he thought that was like incredibly historic. And actually, there's 2 generations now beyond me. So my daughter and I've got 3 kids, and they all live in the same community here, 2 really, really near and 1 like a mile away. And then I've got grandchildren as well, and we all live locally. And so, yeah, there was a journal called Journal of Missional Practice, who are kind of interested internationally at looking at what's happening in mission. And they found out this through Ash, and they came and interviewed me. And then they found out some other things that were weird about me. And you don't know what's weird about you until somebody like tells you that it's odd. So not only have we stayed put forever, my family in these little 4 streets, but there's loads of us that have stayed put in my family. And actually there's like 7 households of my immediate family that live on the same street or just the adjoining roads. And that's increasing. So we're really kind of, I'm a sociologist, so we're really bucking some kind of cultural and sociological trends. Anyway, once it was pointed out to me that it was weird, and I was interviewed and told it was weird, I was invited to take part in a think tank with the Journal of Missional Practice. And what they do is they do this kind of like a Lectio Divina approach to scripture, where you literally look at the same passage of the Bible every time you meet. And I've met them for like 4 or 5 years, and 2 or 3 times a year. And every time we met, we looked at Acts 16, just that part, the first part of it, where it talks about Paul's secondary missionary journey. And we were just like dwelling in this word, like using our imaginations, seeing what intrigued us about the story. And I found that there was so much in that story that just reminded me of my story, and also reminded me a little bit, and was really helpful, about the church, like the Western church's story. And this idea that in my life, I've met people, significant people, who are like characters in the book of Acts. And the most significant one, I guess, for Paul to change the way that he thought about the church and mission was when he met Lydia. So the book is called Looking for Lydia. And I know that's kind of probably like mirror writing. And what you can see is that there's just loads of photos. So we got a friend to design the book. It's, you know, self-published. We wanted to just write our story. We weren't really that interested in, making a big splash with our book. We just wanted to remember really how far we'd got in 25 years. So there's pictures of all the people who are kind of like Lydia's or other characters, which we can go on and chat about. But so they're people that over our years of mission in the East End have changed the way that we've understood what it is to be a follower of Jesus and what it is to try to form a community around that aim. And I suppose the first person in the story is my nan, who's there. You can see her. Now, my nan was one of 16 children born on, actually very, very near to where I'm now. Like literally, I could probably spit and reach the corner of the road where she was born. And she was one of 16 kids, very, very poor slum community in the East End. And her life changed drastically when, as a young child, this itinerant minister called Pastor Howe just came into her community, into that slum, and he had no training. He was a Christian from a local church, and he walked through this slum and he was appalled by the poverty and the children without shoes, one of whom was my nan. And he just felt God saying, like, these are your people, this is your community. And he had no formal training, but began a mission in that community and took my nan, whose name was Rose, to live with him, mainly to save her from a very abusive alcoholic father and a really incompetent mother. And so he took my nan in to live with him, and my nan came to faith as a teenager. And her whole life really was shaped by that church, which is now the church that I'm the minister of. But it seemed like since my nan met this missionary who was willing to go to a very unpromising place and stay there. So he stayed, he was pastor of that church for over 50 years. He was never paid. He just poured his life into this slum community. And I guess if you looked at his life, you would have thought, well, it wasn't a very successful ministry. You know, it was just like this tiny little place. They did in the 30s manage to put up their own sort of asbestos hut mission building, which my granddad put the windows in. But it never really changed the world, you know, but it changed her world. And what happened looking back is that every generation since my nan, downwards, particularly through the women in my family, and we're ethnically Jewish, so that's kind of interesting that it went through the women, not only came to faith, but came to serve in that church. And so, yeah, today me and my mum is still in the same church. There was a time that my nan was in the church. She died in her late 90s, and my daughter in the church, and now my daughter's a leader in one of the sister congregations of the church. And it just seemed like the story chose me. So there was a lot about our story that interested other people, because it wasn't really like the normal Western story of ministry or coming to faith, because it didn't feel like a choice I made. It felt like I was a character in a much bigger story of my own family's story, but also of people who are willing to do something quite small and kind of in a very small and perhaps innocuous community where, you know, people don't really know much, don't really care about it, don't really know about it, and to stay put in that place and just love the hell out of a local community and see what God will do, particularly when the church becomes less churchy. So we wrote the book talking about, you know, the things that we've been through, choosing to stay put, being part of this story, this bigger story of our family's life. And what we realised was it was really a journey, meeting people who changed our ideas about what ministry was, what discipleship was. And they were people usually outside of the church. So that was kind of why we wrote the story. So it was through people recognising the weirdness of my own family, becoming involved in a journal where we could do some kind of dwelling in the words and Lectio Divina stuff. We preached through Acts using this theme about the people, and the preaching series made me feel like we should really write this as a book, really. We should write and pull out these people that have reshaped us and challenged some of our theology. So that was it, really. So Lydia, I guess the original Lydia, was my nan, who taught Pastor Howe that you can't plant a church in the East End by handing out Spurgeon sermons because people can't read. And in fact, you had to meet a lot of their real needs, and you had to be part of them for a long term. You know, you had to teach them to read. You had to take them on outings to get out of the city. You might have to share your home with them. And so that was kind of how stuff changed the nature of the church that I'm now part of. And then it accelerated. So when we started to think about ministry, we were in a very small church in that mission hall. And very quickly, we realised that just caretaking a congregation was not going to fulfil our sense of call. So it was really Pastor Howe. No, his name was not George Howe.
No, Charles.
Charles Howe. Charles Howe. I'm just looking at some of the questions flashing up on the screen. Charles Howe. He was from East Ham Baptist originally, so just from a local church, and a businessman. You know, so definitely like lower middle class, whereas the slum that he came to were definitely lower working class and very poor. So interesting, right? So I guess as we reflected on our story, we thought that there were lessons for the wider church as well, really, about looking to blur church and community, and feeling, I guess, that many people are very afraid of the things that are falling apart in the church in terms of denominations, paid stipends, you know, church affiliation and church attendance, that these things are definitely crumbling. But for me, there was so much opportunity in that, because in Acts 16, Paul has to learn how to do mission differently. And he has to meet somebody like Lydia, who's the least promising person that you would start a church with. And for him, it was kind of like he'd done one missionary journey, which I feel like our church in the West feel like mission is simply, you know, repeating a kind of gospel tract story, inviting people into Sunday gatherings. If we do that better, we'll just grow the church again. You know, if we do the same things better, we'll grow the church again. And it's not working. And as I was reading Acts 16, it was kind of like Paul was trying things and all the doors were closing, a bit like I feel the church in the West is, you know, trying things and just feeling frustrated that the doors are closing, and yet Paul, you know, has to learn a completely new way of doing it. And there's a weird dream, and there's, you know, and there's this kind of sense of God being ahead of Paul, and Paul having to sort of unlearn a lot. So, you know, he eventually goes, you know, on the right direction because he's had the dream, expecting to meet a man from Macedonia, but meets a woman who's actually not even from that area at all, but from the area where the door was closed. So it's a migrant woman, an immigrant woman called Lydia, and they're not in the city and it's not in a synagogue. And, you know, everything about what Paul was expecting growing a church to be didn't work. And yet the church came to mainland Europe through an immigrant woman meeting by a river, being hospitable in her life. And then, you know, the first people in the church, which will become the Church of Philippi, is an immigrant woman, and then a demon-possessed girl, and then a jailer, a Gentiles jailer. And I feel that in our ways of thinking about mission, we do so much that's about sort of attractional models of church, you know, to bring in the young trendy people, or, you know, and we think that that's how church will grow. And that isn't at all what God did in Acts 16. And it's not been at all what God has done in our community here in East Ham. So I suppose I wanted to throw open a question now, in case others have got really interesting stories.
I was only doing a placement for the child, and they were kind of unaware of some pronouns that were new. So it was nice to be able to impart some knowledge so that he could feel like empowered and understand it a little bit more, that there were more options and alternatives that, you know, he could use to identify himself. Of course, he chose those pronouns I'm using, but I explained to him that, you know, there's variety, you know, and you can really make it your own. You decide what you want and what you own and what, you know, how you feel today, tomorrow, and every day. So it was nice and empowering to be able to impart that type of knowledge and just to share. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tia. That's a great example.
Are we
Yeah,
listening in to another conversation? I was stopping to listen in case that was a
it's called
question,
he
but
and
I'm not
pronoun.
sure.
I had never
Danielle, are
heard
you
that,
there?
or maybe just had forgotten that term.
I might have to try and, I think Danielle might. Okay.
Constantly be going to trainings like this because.
Okay, I've muted people so that hopefully that. So we might have to unmute people. I think we might have been listening into another conversation, which was, very interesting, but nothing to do with Lydia. So I just wondered if people have had that experience where they meet somebody or they have an encounter which really disrupts and changes the way that they think about church, ministry, mission, meeting somebody that kind of takes apart some of the things that they're expecting to do with their life and just sends them on like a different direction. Now, I've muted everybody, so you'll have to unmute yourself. But I just wondered whether you've had a similar experience to us, really. And I can go through some of the other characters, but I suppose the first one would be, have you had that experience where God has kind of disrupted and subverted what your idea of yourself as a disciple or as a minister, if you are one, or as a person called to do mission? Have you met a Lydia? Have you had the same disruption in your life? Does anybody want to come in on that?
I'll be brave and start us off, Sally. Lovely to see you. It made me think about, I was a really young Christian, about a year or two of being a Christian when I moved to Manchester and joined a youth project called Eden. I was on the first of the Eden projects in a big council estate called Wythenshawe. And I was uber enthusiastic. The zeal of a convert and all of that. I wasn't from a Christian family. This whole Christian lark was all new to me and all very exciting. And there I was thrust into this incredibly high octane youth ministry, youth work kind of a world in the largest council estate in Europe and all the rest of it. And we had this worldwide message tribe at every event we put on, and 26 youth workers joined this church that only had 40 people in it previously. And and there was all these other 20-year-olds, all with the best of intentions, but arguably very naive. And I remember there was some great young people I got to know. And one night I was woken in the middle of the night by one of these fab young people, and she was in real distress. It was actually to do with her sexuality, and she knocked on the door of our little council house where we lived, and she had slit her wrists, and the blood was dripping from her wrists onto my porch. And I sat with her, and we went to A&E, and I went with her mum. And I was awake all night, and about 10 a.m. she'd been seen. Her mum had taken her home, and I remember sitting just on in my front garden, thinking, this is so much deeper and more complicated than I had ever imagined. This is skilled work. I need training. I need prayer. I need to rethink all sorts, and my roots aren't deep enough. And I sought out some training. I thought I need to train as a youth worker. And I'm not saying that's exactly the same as what you're talking about, because it wasn't like, it was a different type of ministry, isn't it? And I just thought my experience with that wonderful young woman made me realise the depths and the complexity of lives that my heart was definitely wanting to be alongside them, but I had not in any way appreciated how skillful the work needed to be. And so that was sort of my example.
That's really lovely, Anna. And what chimes with me there is that sometimes we imagine that just putting on worship services or preaching great sermons is going to bring the kingdom of God to a very broken area. And I'm sure that is part of it. We still have a fairly recognisable church at the heart of our community. It's just not where we give much energy in terms of, so what happened in our story was kind of probably that, really, in that we kept meeting people who were taking us out of focusing on fixing the church. Whereas in our generation at that time, and we were both, fairly young, we were in our 20s when we were starting, to try and lead a church. And the focus around us was like, fix the church and the community will just, you know, come in and be saved. And what we kept doing was meeting people who were saying, no, you know, the kingdom of God is far beyond what's happening on a Sunday. And actually, you can meet people who are like Lydia's. They'll take the church out of its comfort zone, but they open doors and will change you. You will be converted by meeting them. And, you know, that was a whole different thing for us. The idea that Christians could be converted by their communities, and that actually we had so much to learn. And we needed to stop some of that us and them thinking, you know, the church and the world. And we actually needed to see that we were part of our community, and actually we could broker some soft power in our community if we would partner with people and stop just trying to get people to come and worship on a Sunday. We could have far more impact. So in our story, fairly early on, we set up a community association, a charity, and partnered with people. And the other thing we did was we started to pirate in our community. You know, do you know that book, Be More Pirate? If you've read it, there's a great TED talk on it. So if you look up a TED talk, Be More Pirate, and it's about how you can do social, like, organisation in a community by pirating resources that should have been used for the good of the community, but were either just being, you know, used for empire, if you like, or just been like, the power had been taken away from the community. So we had like this working men's club around the corner from our asbestos hut, completely used for the detriment of the community. You know, there was about 3 families drinking cheap beer, and that was it. And, you know, there was strippers in there, and, you know, it was just to the detriment of the community. And so we won't, you know, I won't go into the details of how it happened, but we basically pirated it. We joined it. It closed. We approached the council and said, we will set up a charity to bring this back in for community good. And, you know, we're in Newham, and they would never have given that to a church, but the church were willing to say, well, we won't hold all the power. You know, we'll partner with people and we'll put our money in. And our church we had £10,000. That was it in our church budget. We didn't pay stipends or anything. We don't have a manse. There was about 20 adults in the church. We put the whole of our budget, £10,000, in to refurbish this community. I mean, actually, it took £500,000 to get that centre back open again, and it took 3 years. And basically, that was the first of our ministry experience that took us out of our church and out of churchy thinking and into our community. And it was the council who ended up providing £500,000. And, you know, it sounds ridiculous and simple and like magic, but it wasn't any of those things. But it was a massive mindset for us that fixing the church was not going to meet what God was calling us to do. And we would keep meeting these people in our community who had key parts of the puzzle for the kingdom of God. And we needed to kind of partner them and get behind some of their hopes and dreams as well. And we've gone on and done that. So the next thing that happened was Dave is a real like restless person. So we hadn't even opened the community centre. We had, you know, no budget. Everybody tithed their time because we didn't have a lot of money either. So we did all the building work, basically whatever we could do ourselves. We did ourselves. We used our own cars as skips because we ran out of money to get skips. It was great fun, you know, and we all grew so much because now we were like seeing each other every weekend. We were working, trying to get this building up. At the same time, just behind where I'm living now, there's this disused playing field that was owned by the council, but they'd let it grow like waist high. The pavilion that had been on it had burnt down, and not through wanton neglect, but just through austerity. The council couldn't bring this back into use. So I know we're being recorded, but the honest truth is Dave and a friend jumped a fence with a hand strimmer and started to cut one football field, because we had these young blokes in the church that would all go off to the local park and play football after church. And we thought, well, that's ridiculous. There's a football field behind us that's just been left to go. So we just literally jumped the fence, go pirate. Now, I'm not saying you should do that, obviously, but I am saying sometimes there's underused resources in communities that communities can reclaim. So we just drop leaflets around all the houses that backed onto this real eyesore of this field, dropped handmade, like photocopied leaflets and said, like, we've just started a charity to bring the community centre back to life. Would you partner with us to bring the field back to life? Now, that field today is a 9-acre site. It's absolutely beautiful. It's the home of Newham County Cricket Club. It's got our pavilion that we fundraised for, £1 million pavilion on it. We use that for our homeless project. Our charity now that began with, people in the church tithing time 25 years ago, this year employed full-time over 40, for permanent posts, over 40 people are employed. And over the year, 100 people, over 100 people were employed in our community in the charity that we set up, knowing nothing about how to do charities, because we weren't focusing on the church. So, I think one of our lessons would be sometimes you have to pirate. You don't have to own everything, but you can claim stuff. If you're willing to partner people and have less power, but more influence.
Yeah.
Anyone want to comment on that? Power and influence and using resources in the community. Sally, you're saying something. Sally?
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding this really interesting because I don't know Lydia, but my dad is a really interesting bloke who's a poet and storyteller. Ending up, he's not a Christian, but he's ended up going on mission, helping build stuff with other people, doing a story, because he's a storyteller who's worked in prisons, doing Bible study when a chaplain asked him to in prison, all sorts of stuff. But the community ethos and the DIY culture that you're talking about, which fits with both kind of festival culture, which I grew up in as well, but also punk and rave culture is coming across here. So I think it's really interesting that there's a rich heritage of stuff in this country that actually all of this fits in with. It's just not church culture.
I really love that. I love the idea of punk church. And I think we are a bit like that. We're not very deferential. I mean, Baptists have got that in their DNA a bit. They had it at the start, that communities would be self-governing and autonomous, and we would break some rules because of our convictions. And then we got very denominational. And I have to say, our denomination are not really that interested in us because we don't count church in the way that they count church. And I love that, Sally, that it's often the people we exclude from church are the very people that God will use to build the next generation of church. It's always the margins. It's always your dads. I bet he can do a great Bible telling. Martin, you've got a point. Tell us about your pirating or what you think about power and influence.
Yeah, just witnessing so much pirating going on. It's really exciting, and just really want to endorse what you say, Sally. I serve Green Pastures, which is a national Christian charity. We buy property so the local church can serve their community.
You're buying one for us, Martin, in East Ham.
It's brilliant. And what we noticed during the pandemic was people thankfully lost all sense of church in the traditional kind of sense of Sunday gatherings, and it meant we had to reinvent the way we do church. And because we're not a franchise model, churches don't run a Green Pastures project. We're just there to serve the local vision. It's released all sorts of just brilliant things. So there's a notorious pub in Weymouth where pretty much 24/7 you can go and watch a pole dance show, and they served alcohol like 365 24/7. It's called the Rodwell. Well, we've just bought that pub for an amazing Christian charity called the Lantern Trust, and they were running night shelters, the kind of the winter night shelter, and heartbroken to see the people that really engaging well during the winter just where they're going to go in the summer. And what would it look like to have this pub and be able to sort of turn it round? And it's just incredible, the stories that are coming out of that. And people seem much more willing to engage in a community landmark like a pub. People would never ever come into the church building. I'm just about to buy a fish and chip shop and cafe in Merthyr Tydfil. It's just been totally run down. The owner wants to retire. So we're buying the downstairs cafe and chip shop, which will be like a training place for people who want to get some work experience. And then upstairs, we've got accommodation for residents. And all over the country, we're just saying, what would it look like for your ministry if you had a residential dimension to it? So all the compassionate ministries that you're involved with, wouldn't it be amazing if you could say, look, why don't you just come stay with us for a bit and benefit from the community? Yeah.
Martin, that's lovely. So you need to write a book called Be More Pirate Church. And because honestly, I think while we're just focusing on fixing the Sunday meeting, we are missing, you know, the kingdom of God is so much more powerfully expressed if we would just forget that idea for a while and follow God beyond, you know, that kind of bounded set idea of what church is. And not every church is going to take over a pub or a field or community centre, but we can start to think in much more radical ways about expressing our presence in the community. And you mentioned the thing about shared living. We're going to, so your charity, Green Pastures, one of the groups that spun out of our charity is called New Day, and they work with homeless people, and you're buying them a house so they can have that. And then the 1930s building that we've got, which we use for our days, we use for our food bank and our community meals with homeless people. We're going to pull that down, and we're building an intentional community where 8 little bed sits of people who are transitioning out of homelessness, plus 2 families from the church, can all live together. So you can all find this on the church website. It's bonnydownschurch.org if you want to see that vision. We're going to call it an urban abbey because we want to have a living room. So it won't just be people that live in will have this building. It will be every day, every evening, there'll be an evening meal, not just for the community living in, but for our church, because we all live locally and we're still fairly small. You know, we're only like 100 people. So we can get together and eat together. So I completely agree with you that hospitality and shared living is a total key going forwards for how the kingdom of God is going to be expressed. I don't think it's going to be stages. I think it's going to be tables. And so we wrote a chapter called Living with Priscilla and Aquila. And that was about our experience. We've always been in the same community, but we had this chance to go and plant a church from scratch in the Royal Docks. And for us, we've always lived with hospitality. So Dave and I have been married like 34 years coming up. And I think there's probably been about 3 of them that it's only been us or our kids living together. We've always had an open, hospitable home. But when we went and moved to do this church from scratch, all they had was a manse, and they didn't have any buildings or any, nothing really, just a manse. And what happened was our kids grew up married and left home, and we just started to fill the house up more intentionally with people. And when we left that particular church from scratch that we built, it took us 10 years. And we left a team of 12 local leaders, all young people. And as we look around that room, 7 of them had lived with us. And we never planned to grow church leaders, but we just invited people to live with us. So like university students, people from our youth group. And then we moved in a family when we got more room. I mean, it was actually only a 4-bedroom house, but we absolutely rammed it full of people. Only had 1 kitchen, so it was really shared life. And we moved in a Brazilian family with us. We shared with them, and they were fantastic pastors to children in the community. And Elio, who'd come from a favela in Brazil, was not a bit afraid of the gangs of Silvertown. He used to sort of say, that's not really a gang because they're not shooting each other in the street. They've got knives, not guns. And so he was like completely unafraid. So him and his kids moved in, and suddenly our church had this presence in youth work. Now, all of that happened through hospitality. And it really taught Dave and me that shared living is a great way to disciple people. And if I was in charge of the church in Britain, I would say manses shouldn't have spare rooms. Now, I know that's controversial, and there might be good reasons why some do, but I would like to start. The principle is manses shouldn't have empty bedrooms. Now, people can push back on me at that. I told you I was a bit radical, but I think if that resource has been given to the kingdom of God, and we live in a housing crisis, which we do, and we've got so many migrants that are coming that need welcome, that find faith in our communities but nowhere to belong, why have we got this ridiculous situation where we've got buildings that are basically empty for most of the week? Our church buildings are empty for most of the week. They could be turned into shared intentional communities. We could live together, and that way you don't need a stipend. So what was brilliant for us was we've never had a full-time wage, and even when we've been in church, like a stipend, even where we've been in churches that could afford it, we never take it for one person. So in Bonnie Downs at the moment, we're still not very well off. I mean, our charity employs 40 people, and they all earn more than Dave or me have ever earned. But we put our one stipend between 4 paid leaders. And we all work, we're all bivocational. And that's lovely, because it means we don't get bent out of shape, because nobody's looking to us to lead the church. We're part of the community, and we're called out, and we lead aspects of community life. Now, actually, it's only me as a leader there that focuses on the Sundays at all. The other 3 focus on the blurry edge of the church. So Johnny's got a social enterprise with homeless people doing gardening, and a therapeutic community through gardening. Dave chairs BDCA, the charity, to keep the charity and the church together. We've got, and Sarah is a pastor, but most of her time is spent in our community with women with no recourse to public funds, and doing pastoral work through that. So it's a very different model of church than the one we started with. We imagined that we would be pastors, and one of us would have a wage, from the church, like a stipend. And now we're so relieved that that never happened for us, because we've got jobs in our church and community. I'm a lecturer part-time. We know how to live well cheaply. So we share cars. We have a real fun time in our community, but it doesn't rely on having a lot of money. There's always celebrations. Honestly, it is a really fun place to live. It's not like this really difficult, grit your teeth kind of, we're in the inner city and we wish we were somewhere else. And no, I wouldn't live anywhere else in the world. I absolutely love my community. I think it's the best place to be a disciple. But shared living, radical hospitality, bivocationality, this was all taught to us. And that features in that chapter 6, Living with Priscilla and Aquila, where we learn to change our lives increasingly with levels of hospitality. I wonder if anyone's got something about that, radical hospitality changing the way that you decide to be church, or doing stuff that changes the way that you use money as a community. Anyone want to come in on that? Or you can ask us anything, but I just thought your stories are probably, Anna and Martin have told the best stories so far. Anyone want to come in on any of this?
I might jump in. If anybody knows me, I'm a church leader. I'm not full-time, but my church community is quite a bit different than yours in that it's more of a gathered community. It's an inclusive church. So you have people with all sorts of different backgrounds and needs, and people that are drawn to a particular kind of church that feels safe to them. So we don't have like a local patch, which is something that I wrestle with a bit, because I kind of didn't anticipate that that's where God would lead me, but that's definitely where I'm meant to be. And so some of these things I'm trying to translate. I guess that's like this, we've had all these conversations personally, but like how I translate some of the ethos and the values of what you're saying to the community that I'm actually in. And I'm thinking about things too, I want to say it vaguely since we're recording, but like safety and, living in a home where we've always, hospitality, eating around the table, being together has always been really important to us. But having those, and then having young kids at home now that I currently do, but having some of those experiences where things have come into our home that have made it not a place of peace for us. And so how you kind of work out boundaries around that work. And I kind of keep going back and forth about what that can look like in my life, and also what I want to model to my community. Yeah. When crap happens,
Yeah.
How you manage that in your home.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, because we've always lived we've always lived with people living with us, and generally it is probably people with quite chaotic backgrounds that need a place to live over the years. So we've always had people like that living with us, and we've had that as we've had our own kids and then our own teenagers. So they became sort of used to that. I think that is a particular calling that not everybody, is called to do. But you could have a missionary come and live with you, or, like an elderly, lonely person, an elderly woman, come and live with you. It doesn't have to be like, junkies and that. But we did have that. We did have that. And I think it was God's grace, really, that kept disasters from happening. Our oldest daughter found it very difficult because we not only have this church where everybody shares life, a big extended East End family, all living near you, but also people living in our home. And I think our eldest daughter was like, whoa, where am I in all of this? And she did have quite a dramatic rebellion at the age of 15. And most of that was about like wanting to define herself apart from us. But I have to admit, I just blamed myself and my choices and thought, like, she's lived with such chaotic people, I haven't protected her. Like, she's ended up being drawn to chaotic lifestyle, really. And it was God's grace, by using people who I never would have dreamt would have been the solution, who came in to help our family when we were struggling. So I think if you're called to live amongst, that kind of more chaotic thing, you really do need to tune into God's voice quite carefully about the decisions you're making. But the truth is, I've seen kids raised in very protective families become really quite monstrous people. And certainly not that healthy in terms of their emotional lives or spiritual lives. Now, there's no, I'm not saying, but I have to say, now my daughter now lives bang opposite me. She came to faith, when she was about 16 and a half. She was bang opposite me in an open house. She's married, but they've got a young woman living with them who's pretty much their foster child. Now, my daughter's only in her early 30s, and she's pretty much fostering a woman in her 20s. And Johnny, the assistant minister, lives in that house as well. Now, I would never have thought of all of my kids that she would choose to live in the kinds of crazy, and it was her choice, and she rejected it for a while, and then she just, that's her way that she lives now. Now, there's no guarantees in any of that, and obviously a whole ton of God's grace. But what I would say is, if God has called you to live in a certain more radical way, you do have to believe that God is going to protect you and give you ways of other people helping you out when you're not coping very well. But you do have to be willing to admit to your community, we're struggling as parents now. And I was very open about my struggle. And I don't think I would have raised my children and survived without a very good East End church around me that could, come in and take the kids away, or, tell me what I was doing wrong. And yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah.
I'd say that there's like seasons of life too. So, like that's for my husband and I, like having our home be open. It's been massively open for different stages of our life where we had, 40 people around for dinner every week, and we could do that for a season. But, like, I don't know, for me, at times God has asked me to put some of that stuff down. And that's been hard because it becomes part of like who you are, and God, feeling like God moving me to take a step back for different seasons, for different reasons, or I can look back are absolutely the right thing. I guess it's like how you get the balance of, the calling for the right time, listening to God's voice.
Yeah.
For when we need to rest, when we need to make changes,
do you know what
we need to receive.
That is absolutely the key to the whole story, really. I feel a lot of people approach church and ministry with a very man-made frame, usually the inherited framework of church or ministry that they know, and a million how-to books. How to do this church, how to do that church. If you all do Alpha, if you all do Messy Church, if you all do... Now, I'm not saying that we can't learn from other people's experiences, but in Acts 16, none of it is working. And what happens is that they can totally rely on listening to God, and God knows how to build the church in that community, and God will tell them, but in very subverting kinds of ways, like a dream, a meeting, a closed door. And unless they're listening to God and give up some of their agency, some of their, we know how to do this, we can do this. So for us, spiritual practices have been at the heart of our life. We use Lectio Divina. Our community meets together at 8 o'clock every morning to practice contemplation together. I mean, that doesn't sound very Baptist, does it? So we spend for me, it's like the first half hour of the day, we're just listening to God, practicing silence, practicing Lectio Divina, practicing examine prayers once a week. And we're not trying to think that we know how to do it, or that anybody else knows how to do it, but the Spirit of God knows how to do it. And you need to listen. So though you're right, Danielle, there can be a season where God is saying to you, open your home. And then a season where God is saying to you, draw back, give time to your close relatives, give time to your marriage. But if you're not listening to God, you're going to think there's a blueprint, and there's no blueprint. That's what I liked about Acts 16. There's no blueprint. And clearly God is the Spirit is out there knowing what to do, and they are catching up with what the Spirit is doing in their community, and they've lost the map. They're off the map, and literally they end up in Europe, don't they, for the first time ever. They're in mainland Europe for the first time ever. So that wouldn't have happened if they kept to the map that they had. So I really get it, Danielle. And for us, spiritual practices have been a big part of that, using more contemplative practices. Somebody had their hand up.
It was
me. It was me. I'm finding this really, really, really inspiring and interesting. And I think you've partly just answered this, but I was going to ask you, Sally and Danielle, about how you hear God when you're listening, because it's something I'm trying to learn from lots of different people, and how you hear and know what your next ways forward are.
Do you want to go, Danielle?
Oh, it's probably not one thing. I realized in recent years that quite often it's a combination of taking space just to think and to be, as well as to pray and invite God in. But sometimes it's recognizing that the answers and the direction come from other people, and being vulnerable with other people, and inviting lots of different kinds of advice and input, not being fully, not having this hierarchy of whose voice I'll listen to. Sometimes that's important. So yeah, it's kind of the dialogue with God happens a lot of times that way with some of the bigger stuff. And taking, for me, I know I need lots of time to contemplate and sit with information without jumping the gun to make big calls, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and for us, I think just starting the day with not having your own agenda for the day necessarily all mapped out. So we use a Coromila prayer book, and I love some of the ways it says, you know, it talks about honouring this life with all its potentials and possibilities, and being present to the love and encounters that God can bring into the day. And I think if you've already know what you're doing, it's much harder for God to really use you. When you are out of your depth, or you do feel like, I really do not know what I'm doing now, that is often the time that God can do the most amazing things that you would never. So yeah, we use like contemplative practices more. That sort of happened just before lockdown. I also just find like just listening to other people's stories. I mean, you know, what Anna shared, clearly that very tragic story shaped Anna in a way that reading about the lives of people who are struggling would never have done. So proximity to your community, for me, that is the way you hear God, because God loves those people. He loves that community. He loves those lives. And when you let that touch you, you don't have to like pick an issue, or, you know, you pick, I think, this is something Shane Claiborne says, actually, you pick your community, and then their issues and their gifts and their talents become your agenda. So, you know, for me, it is all about just spending time with people. So one of the chapters, I think this would be the last one I'll mention, but we did this one called Recognising Cornelius. And I love the story of Cornelius, because this is, again, another meeting, this time Peter rather than Paul, which blows apart somebody's theology. And I think we should be ready for that to happen. You know, I'm far less certain about stuff now, 25 years into being a minister. I'm far less certain, because I keep meeting people who blow apart my theology. And it was Cornelius for Peter, right? You know, so it's this dirty Gentile, and he has this dream about the animals, and then he knows what it means, by the way, doesn't he? You know, God says, don't call unclean what I've called clean. Peter has the dream, the dirty animals, and it's Cornelius at the door, and he knows. He's like, oh, hang on a minute, I thought church was about my ethnicity, my Jewish people. I thought they would become Christians, make them Jewish, then Christian. And suddenly he meets Cornelius, and he sees the Spirit of God at work in somebody that he didn't even think should be on God's radar. And the church have to have quite a traumatic change of heart about Gentiles. And we've met a few Corneliuses, you know. So one was my best friend Vaughan, a gay man that I met at university, who had this profound faith, but had spent his life really feeling excluded from the church. And condemned from the church, but managed to maintain quite a beautiful Catholic faith. And it was so challenging to me as this young mum, really family. We're complete opposites. Vaughan was, he passed away a number of years ago, but he was like really upper middle class, really well educated, really posh, expat family, really, you know, wealthy middle class gay man. And I was this working class Christian minister woman with too many children, and we became best friends. And it totally shook my world, because I could see God at work in his life, like in really profound and challenging ways. And we became really good friends. And Vaughan actually lived with us for a while as well. And it was like, whoa, hang on a minute. He's Catholic and he's gay. And I'm finding Jesus in him. And it's not like I'm out there to help him. He's helping me. He's like, I could, you know, and so our church has, you know, I say we're an unusual Baptist church. We do contemplative practices in the morning. We don't count how big the church is by the Sundays. Our ministers all share one wage. We all spend most of our time with like people in our community, homeless people particularly. And we've got an inclusion charter. Now, that was a very important thing for our church, to say that we will not exclude anybody from full participation in our Christian community. You know, and the inclusive church charter that we signed, it took a couple of years for us to get that. And yeah, there's people that won't join our church because of that. You know, it doesn't actually upset us, because we know what God has called us to do. We can't be inclusive and say everybody's welcome, but when you come in, you have to become like us. You have to become straight, you have to become middle class, you have to become... No. Partly this journey has been us saying, oh my goodness, the Holy Spirit is at work in people that we didn't think were on God's agenda, but they are, and they're part of God's gift to our community, and we better welcome them. So, you know, we tell the story of Vaughan here, also the homeless people that have ended up giving me communion, we tell that story here. Our nativities are marvellous in our community because we just make them community events. So yeah, we had a Muslim Angel Gabriel one year, and her Muslim family came along and loved it. And, you know, it all looks a bit messy. It's all not to do with a them and us mentality, the church and the community. It's all a bit messy. It's all a bit blurred. But oh my goodness, have we felt so much more of God's love and joy and life and colour. And, you know, I would never want to go back to caretaking a group of Christians. You know, I know some people are called to do that, and God bless them for doing it. But there is so much more that could be done if you would just meet Cornelius. You know, the person that blows apart your idea of who God is using in your life to actually convert you. So yeah, inclusion was a big part of our journey too. Another reason why some people don't join our church. I don't know if others have had that you meet somebody, it just like, you just say, oh no, God's at work in my Muslim neighbour. Go on, Kathy.
Yeah, and it's not an experience from church, but it's something that had a profound effect on me when I was younger. I went to Ghana to teach for 3 years. I applied when I was 23 and went with VSO, voluntary service overseas. And like Anna's story from the beginning, actually, I was quite sort of young and quite naive, and not massively trained. I'd got like a TEFL qualification and a bit of like my degree in English literature, but I'd never really travelled very much or hadn't taught in a school in the UK. So I had lots and lots to learn. But when I got there, I realised that the idea was that we work in partnership, a partnership between the volunteer, i.e. me, the charity VSO, and then the local partners, which are the school. And so I had these classes full of students who were studying for their end of secondary school exams. So they were kind of, you know, they'd not fallen away at various different points, because so many children where I was living were living in the kind of poverty that I've never ever seen or experienced before. You know, kids with extended stomachs with kwashiorkor. There was a cholera outbreak in the nearby town at one point. Me and my friends all got malaria, somebody got typhoid, somebody got TB. There was lots of, it was kind of not a very kind of healthy, it's a very, very poor part of Ghana, I should say, because the south is quite rich and it's quite different. And within that context, I was teaching in a school and learning kind of how to be a teacher and how to teach in people's second language and how to help the students pass exams. But I was learning lots and lots about the community as well. And I just remember this one lad that I was teaching, his name was Jonathan Aibo, and we had a conversation one day because I was teaching Things Fall Apart, and he challenged me in class about some different things, and the other students were really shocked, and I said, but it's really good that he's done this challenge. This is the kind of thing you can write in your exam. He was saying basically this this book, it had it's a story of when the British came to Nigeria and what happened. And it's told through this very clever tale about two white missionaries, one of whom is the kind of good missionary in inverted commas who loves the people and supports the road building and the school building and the hospital buildings. And the other one is very, very autocratic and you know, has people whipped and horrible things happen. And he says, but you know, this is the excuse that's always given, but colonialism was okay because it brought schools and roads and hospitals. And the other students were like, oh, you're being rude to the teacher. And I was like, no, this is really amazing critical thinking. Like, please write this in your exam. Yeah. And please feel free in the classroom to like think about these things and discuss these things. And after class, we were talking and I realized that he was my age. And it's one of those things that cuts across everything, isn't it? When someone's your exact age and born in the same year as you from wherever in the world, I was just like, oh my goodness, like the only reason that I'm the teacher and you're the student is that I've had all of this massive amount of privilege in my life, and I don't come you know, from a very rich background at all. My mum doesn't have any O levels. I was lucky that I got to go to school and then go to university. And me and my sister were the first in our family to go to university. But I realised immediately, this lad, like, because of where he lives, has got so fewer opportunities because of poverty, because of work, because of all the work the children have to do collecting firewood and fetching water, and because of all the sickness around, because people are so much poorer. And it just completely opened my eyes to any idea of kind of, you know, sort of, it's because it was slightly impositional as well. VSO is meant to be a partnership, but of course people are traveling to the global south predominantly from the global north, and it just massively opened my eyes to actually the reality of our world and how it works. And I've just been reminded of it because one of my friends had a similar experience recently. I went to work in Greece a few years ago with refugees who were arriving in Athens in one of the community centres there, where we were having a very shared life. And I told my friend about this, and she went about a year after me, just before lockdown. And she met a Syrian woman, and she had exactly the same experience, where she's like, oh my God, all my privilege and anything we think we've achieved in our lives, it's literally just the good fortune of having been born in the UK with a health system and an education system. And at the time, our higher education was free as well. And so, yeah, it just really challenged me to rethink how we think about global north and global south. So I hope that's kind of relevant.
Yeah, and do you know what I love about that, Kathy, is it's, for me, I just put it in, it's always encounters that do that. I don't think we think our way to better beliefs. I think we live our way to better beliefs. And I honestly do think, and it's a risk. I mean, Sally's point, really interesting. There's a real vulnerability, isn't there, when you're the Cornelius for somebody else, and yet you know that they might not get you, yet you do feel that unless, you know, if we all just live in our echo chambers, people are not going to encounter. So a key word for me was alterity, and that was kind of what the whole Lydia book is about. Alterity is when you meet somebody who's so radically different from you. Maybe you've been taught to fear them or to judge them, and you meet them, and not only does that encounter change them, it changes you. And we've had that time and time again with Muslim neighbours, with, you know, and it's not about losing who you are or apologising for who you are. You know, in your context, Kath, you know, you're a white Western woman. You can't excuse your, you know, you can't be so aware of your privilege that you won't ever meet anybody from the global south. You can't be so, you know, but there's a real humility in saying, I need to meet people who are different than me because I need to learn their perspective. And then when you're the Cornelius, you know, I think actually the hero of the story in the Peter and Cornelius story is Cornelius, isn't it? Because he knows those people are prejudiced against him. You know, he knows. And, you know, bless you, Sally, in your situation there, it's very, very brave and courageous to say, I know you're likely to reject me now, but I am called to journey with you. And, you know, you shouldn't take risks that make, you know, that just become abusive. But yeah, there's something about that alterity that changes us. And I think it's all about encounters with people. You know, we'd probably still be stuck looking after 20 people in a 1930s mission hut and feeling exhausted by it, unless we'd met all these different people that changed our minds about what church could be. And, you know, yeah, I think we're running out of time, Danielle, but Dave, would you just put would you put in the websites just in case people want to? So the church has got a website. We'll put it in the chat, and there's pictures from the Lydia story. There's a tab across the top that's called Looking for Lydia. And if you want to see pictures of all these people that we mention and the communities that we've been in and the field and the community centre, then they're all on the Bonnie Downs Church website. And then there's a website for our charity, which is still an ongoing of the main way. Alterity, I'll put that in.
It's a great word.
It's a nice word, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you can see them. And if you want to get these books, we'll happily send you them. I can't remember. We'll happily send, if you don't want to buy them on Amazon, we'll send you them for just the cost of the postage. So I think we've only got about a dozen left. We regularly just buy them and give them away to loads of people. and they've got little questions at the end of the chapters. So if you were in a kind of like missional community setting or like a pioneering setting, the idea is that you read a chapter and then you talk about your Lydias and your Corneliuses and your, we didn't mention Festus and Agrippa, and we didn't mention, you know, we mentioned Priscilla and Aquila, but there's loads of other ones. And then it all lands in the end of Romans with that incredible, when Paul is saying, send my greetings to these people. And the list, oh my goodness, there were women. There were women apostles, you know, in Paul's list. And there's slaves mentioned alongside aristocrats. And there's, it seems like there's house churches in Rome that have got different leaders. And there's Priscilla and Aquila who've been with him through everything still there. And we've got friends like that, that were there right at the start and are still there with us today. We just went to Paris with them on a triple date. And we've got people like that in our lives. Priscilla and Aquila, they know us. They absolutely know us since I was 6. You know, we're still leading a church with a friend I had since I was 6. And at the end of Romans, you see, oh my goodness, the church is beautiful and it's diverse. And it's the place where these people that should not have anything in common absolutely share life to the point that they're willing to live and die together. So that's how we ended the book, with the Roman brothers and sisters. So you can have the book for free if you don't want to buy it on Amazon. And just send us a, should we put our email up there, put my church email up there. You can email me. And if you want to come down to East London and have a little walking tour, I normally take you through the back fence and you go and see the field and the pavilion and the garden. We grow food, and then you can
come climb the fence.
We've unbolted 2 of them. It's completely illegal still, Danielle. You'll be pleased to know we haven't figured out illegality. We've unbolted the fence so you can get through and go to the fields, and then get through my mum's house and have a cup of tea, and then come to the community centre, see the old asbestos hut. It's all literally on one block, and we live right in the middle of it. So you're very welcome to come down if you like to. Yeah. Oh my goodness, they're making you read it at the Nazarene Theological College.
As they should. No, sorry. That's great, Anna.
Yay!
I love that, Sally. Just like reflecting on this conversation and how so much of it kind of goes back to this discussion of power and who has power, like in the way that we lead our community, and what Sally was saying from within the church, you know, the power dynamics apply. And I was thinking about there's a theologian called Stephen Bevins who's written about prophetic dialogue, and one of the things that really sticks with me is that, like, losing this distinction between the teacher and the learner, the giver and the receiver, and how every encounter in community and church we can learn and we can teach and we can give and we can receive in every encounter, and how important that seems to be where you are, and important in any kind of dynamic of creating a community where the power, you know, we're kind of subverting the power dynamics of years and eras gone by, aren't we, by saying, actually, if anyone has a better idea than me, we'll go with it. You know, if someone, like for me, a lot of stuff around food is even that, you know, if someone wants to serve and cook and they're doing something that I'd never cook myself, like, are you humble enough to allow the other person to step up and lead? It's really continues to be like a huge challenge in my discipleship anyway, is how you share power. So thank you so much, Sally.
Very welcome. And thank you for people that have shared your stories, and you'd be really, really welcome to come and have a look at what we do, or just to send us, you know, links to what you're doing. I think Stockport is kind of similar to us, so that's lovely, Sarah. Lovely to hear about. And I know your olive project, when I look at that is exactly that's the bread and butter of what we do, just getting around tables with people.
On a very much smaller scale, Sally, but your work.
But it doesn't matter. I mean, we didn't plan. Actually, small is beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
And we didn't plan big. And if we'd have stayed as a small project with, you know, no paid staff, it would have been just as beautiful. So yeah.
We had one lady came in today, Sally, and I think we have had our 7th birthday this week at our Olive Branch sort of drop-in thing. One of the ladies just came in today and she was saying, I have never ever felt such love anywhere than when I come in here. And she just sort of spontaneously said it. Not a Christian, she sort of comes to church every now and then, but she said it so genuinely. And I don't know, this week they seem to have, they just suddenly bought Chris a bunch of flowers, and they just seem to have had a moment this week. We did a training day and it seemed to all sort of come to a head where they just suddenly feel so closely connected to us all. And she just said it. We're trying to help her to get a job, but she kind of doesn't want to get a job because she doesn't want to leave us. But we were like, no, you know, you must. We're really keen for you to, you know, to move on. But so yeah, it's just been a special day today, really. But it does remind us of when we've heard about your work at Bonnie Downs. There's so many sort of parallels and just sort of getting out there. And I love the way you said in the book about, can't remember which way you said it, but the church not being the centre of the community, but the community, or whichever way around.
Being at the heart. Yeah.
The church, yeah, whichever way around it was. About the community needs to be the heart of us, really. And it just all rings so many bells, really.
And isn't it weird? It's like you can see it happening, like, and we don't all know that God is doing it in all these other places, because when you're very committed to a local place like Stockport or East Ham or Birmingham or, you know, a little bit, you don't see that the Spirit is like bubbling up, fermenting change. And you know, that's why I love it when people come and visit us or connect with us in some way, because it just reassures you that you're not nuts, you know, you're not like, and that you are building something worthwhile. Because sometimes you do feel, unless you've got a growing congregation of people gathering on Sundays, you think, what have I done with the last 25 years? I've got less people worshipping with me now than when we started, you know. But then you think, hang on a minute, what did God ask me to do? You know, and I honestly think that building the kingdom of God is where the church healthily grows. When you try to build a church, you can just build something really weird and dysfunctional and doesn't look like Jesus, doesn't produce disciples. When you focus on building the kingdom of God, the church just grows in weird ways, in strange new forms, you know. It's a bit uncontrollable. But thank you, everybody. Yeah, that's lovely. All right, Danielle, we ought to finish, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sally. And we will be posting the video. So if you want to go back and watch, hopefully it's not too garbled for my horrible internet. But thanks, Sally, and thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.
Thanks, Sally. That was
Bye. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Danielle.